Well, good evening and hello, everybody. Welcome to First and Last Word Poetry Series. I think everybody knows who I am. We have a special guest, tech host tonight, Steve Glines, who is the one of the founding members of the Bagel Bards, and he's also the editor and publisher of the online, long-running, well-known zine, literary house, Wilderness House Literary Review. So Steve also writes a lot of fiction and travelogue materials, and he's a presence on the internet with Wilderness House Literary Review. So welcome, Steve Glines, and thank you for your participation and your timely assistance. So we have a great lineup tonight, and after the two readings are concluded, we'll have a Q&A, and then we'll have a limited open mic. So let's get started. Going alphabetically, this person needs almost no introduction, but he's going to get one. Okay, Steve Ratiner has just completed his third term as Poet Laureate of Arlington, Mass. He's published 3 poetry chapbooks and will read from a new full-length manuscript entitled Griefs Apostrophe. His work has appeared in scores of journals in America and abroad, including Parnassus, Agni, Hanging Loose, Poet Laureate, Salamander, QRLS in Singapore, Musach in Israel, and Poetry Australia. He's also written poetry criticism for the Christian Science Monitor, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Washington Post, and the Aerosmith Journal. Giving the Word, Conversations with Contemporary Poets was reissued in a paperback edition by the University of Massachusetts Press, and features interviews with many of poetry's most important figures. His Red Letter Poetry Project is well known and widely read. He publishes a new piece each week featuring poets from across the United States and beyond. Anyway, I give you Stephen Ratiner.
Thank you, Harris. Thank you. Delight to be with you. Thanks to Harris and Steve for taking care of the technology. Thanks to Gloria in absentia, who couldn't be with us tonight. And a delight to be able to read, to share the same virtual stage with Elizabeth, too. So I am going to read new poems from a manuscript I've just completed called Griefs Apostrophe. It takes a very, I think, primal theme, which is that maybe the central feature of being a human being is having and losing. Having from that very first moment that an infant begins reaching for the world with his hand or her mouth. And at the same time, we're beginning to lose every step of the way. The process of grieving is often not encouraged in our society. And so this is a poem that is exploring that. It's in a book that explores that. It's in 3 sections. The first section is focused mainly on personal grief. The second about communal and societal grieving. And the third about acts of redemption, which very often have to do with making art. I decided, since it's a brief reading, to try to knit this together by just picking some of the poems that had to do with my family, especially my mother and father. And I have to say one thing quickly. I realized in putting together the selection for tonight, I realized how often I use italics and em dashes as a technique for changing the way you hear the poem. And of course, you can't see the em dashes or the italics. Sometimes I'll remember to put quotes in the air if that might help, and I'll try to use my voice so you hear the difference. I love the fact that em dashes can set things off parenthetically or sometimes break them mid-thought. And you're going to see that happening in this first poem. It's called Fathering. After the stroke, when language froze over in his throat, He had a hard time with the snow. He couldn't say, and the sky wouldn't stop saying. We went walking, and the tracks in our wake, and the cardinal red calligraphy scribbled between trees, and the ticking like Morse across hat brim. And the time I was certain his hiss was about to coalesce into Stephen. And the dream I kept having, moon slick trail rising between birch ribs, breath becoming smoke, ink becoming breath. Writing these words across the page, and even before the sentence is complete, the footprints filling up with white. This is a very recent poem. It's entitled Jews, and I suddenly realized this one has some terms I probably should tell you in advance. Some would be common knowledge, some not. One is yarmulkes, the little tiny prayer hat that you would wear in temple especially. Eloheinu, one of the euphemisms for God. A shofar is the ram's horn that you use for special high holidays. And one that's far less familiar is the yad. If you've been in a Jewish temple and you see someone reading from the Torah, you're not supposed to touch the Holy Scroll. Instead, you have a little silver pointer, which looks like a little silver finger. And that's what you use to run along the words. So the Yah, like a hand, is pointing and touching the scroll. Jews. Jews, says my mother, out of nowhere, at the kitchen table, staring off at what? The next door neighbors? The garden feeder? Our own reflections? Agreeing, I tell her, sure, the chickadees wear black yarmulkes. And the waxwings, her sly smile, wrap their prayer shawls smooth across narrow shoulders. What to say then concerning the sparrows scattering millet? And the mourning doves chanting Eloheinu, gleaning in the bleached grass? Is sunshine and abundant seed perhaps a vision of the promised land? And the blue jay's shofar, the call to prayer for a feathered diaspora? Now my mother gazes upward through the dogwood canopy, where a jet liner's bright sliver points like a yod to the blue scripture unscrolling across the September morning. Though I don't know it then, this is the last time my mother will ever visit my home. I put up a second pot of coffee, toast the corn muffins, light cream, her packets of Splenda, the quiet between us. I lay my palm across the cobbled streets of old Jerusalem, my mother's arthritic hand. Amen, she murmurs, as if no one was listening. There's another poem featuring my mom later in life. It's called For Now. Near the end, she stopped eating altogether. One evening, when I brought chicken soup shoaled with wild rice, a quick shake of her head, whispering, "What for?" And yet, in sleep, her mouth moved constantly, making a meal of departure. Watching her, I wondered, was the opposite of hunger grief, grace, love, or need? What feeds on our silence? Not that it would have made a difference, but I wish I'd proposed we take turns with the spoon, a mouthful, countering what for with for now. So in writing about my mom, who's passed a number of years ago, of course, memories get triggered and the memories get reshaped. We use the memories. That's part of the grieving process, I think. We use the memories to understand our life in a new way. So this poem has, it's all in 2-line stanzas. You'll hear 2 lines, and then 4 lines are set aside with those long em dashes, and then it'll come back to the meaning of the first 2. Since you don't see it on the page, I'll give you that as a heads up. It's entitled mending. She leaned forward, my mother, and took it between her teeth. This lie I told, this sin, this failing of the flesh, that was, it goes without saying, her flesh as well. Shamed now by my flawed heart, can't help myself. And bit the thread in two, freeing up her bright needle and leaving behind, see, the mended tear in the knee of my blue school trousers. See, she said, and she couldn't she? Right to the heart of her love-stunned little boy. What is new? This poem is named Anne for my mom. My mom was married 3 times, and she survived all 3 husbands. To me, that's almost unimaginable. Picturing what that would be like to have to care for 3 loved ones, nursing them toward the end of life. And it let me know about the depths of my mom's strength that perhaps I had never fully understood before. So this poem is called Anne. My mother took their names. It's what a woman did then. The bonds of marriage, more honor than ownership. Ratiner, Silverstone, Rich. 3 beloveds, and after time, her steadfast hands helped nurse each into darkness, what a woman did, until, alone again, it came her turn to wed oblivion. The dowry of molecules, the infinitesimal bursts of energy, bonds breaking, joining again, the earth's bacterial vow, I do. 100 years since your birth, mother. And this rain-tilled April morning, I woke up wondering what I should call you now. Anne Carbon, Anne Nitrogen, Mrs. Silence. This is an older poem that never found a satisfactory conclusion. When I resurrected it more recently because I realized it fit very neatly in this series. So it's a memory poem about my father. It's called Learning the Business, and you'll understand the business as the poem goes along. Learning the business. Come Saturday, when the steel vats backed up, you were the one, Daddy, who answered the call, drove down Jamaica Ave, stripped to the waist, and fished 200 pounds of dry cleaning from the murky slush. Gabardine dresses and suit coats laid out across the workbench like the bodies of the drowned. Find the clog, flush the line, rescue the day, get the crew back to work. While somewhere your father sat chanting in temple, your brothers boisterous at Sardi's or the track. I remember you bought me an ice cream and I perched on a high school, watching as you half disappeared into the benzene tank, licking my vanilla swirl, giddy with the fumes. Driving home, you told me, when I was older, you'd teach me the business, how to keep the books, so I'd have nothing to do with the scald of the 6-foot presses or the chemical brew. 60 years later, and here, Daddy, I'm making my accounting. Your left hand knuckled on the steering wheel. Your right idly strumming the chords of my neck, and me wedged beside you, mouth slack with sugared milk. These days, I read neither ledger nor prayer book. But remember this, you were 200 pounds that Saturday morning, a little more than half that when, come January, the orderlies wheeled you back from radiation on the steel gurney, laid you into your hospital bed, limp as laundry. This is a poem that actually starts the collection, but I thought it would make more sense leaving it near the end here tonight. It's called Clockwork, and it's written in short and long stanzas with a little extra space between them. I'll give you that space with the pause. But really what it is a journey I didn't get to take. My dad died when I was very young, 8.5. This is perhaps, had he lived to an older time and I'd become an adult, what maybe I wished had happened. And these, of course, are the things that we can only make, perhaps, in poetry and in art. Clockwork. The dahlias are early this year. A matter of days, they said. The Perseid, stone swarm, fist-sized nickel, iron, and silicate, that comet's tail we pass through, regular as clockwork. The hospice nurse arrives around noon. Today, she's brought him a hot pastrami on seeded rye. Not to eat, she explains. Eating's out of the question. Just smell, just chew, then spit it into my hand. 1 per minute, sometimes more. Each bright arc. In the eyes, in the ears, in the tongue's lavish spill, this living, and the pleasure I derived recognizing his boyish smile. And then here's the father's voice. At 4 a.m., he tells me, before the skies begun to lighten, robins and blackbirds, then mockingbirds, mourning doves, warblers, chickadees, a lull sometimes, but then the cardinal's brazen aria. Cacophony, I ask him. He shifts uneasily in the bed. Ecstasy. The aching, the waiting. A matter of hours, windows streaked with pollen, sun making rounds. The E train to Jamaica, transferring to the Q5 bus and the slow crawl along Merrick, and then a 3-block walk up Francis Lewis. In my chest, opening like a dahlia, this nova of white petals, edged with violet and gold. Like clockwork, like fate, a matter of minutes, late. In the end of the book, some of the material of this grieving starts to make itself into other things. So I wanted to definitely end the reading with a little bit of an uplift. So here's some things from the close. Visitation. Your voice, not the whole of it, just a wounded vowel racing past inches above my bare head, then sweeping up to perch on a 3rd-floor iron rail, preening, a royal of snowy feathers in November wind. If not for reflex, it might have gored me right between the eyes. The first line of this poem, your voice, owl-taloned, remembrance, the shrift of evening light, not the whole force of your absence, but enough. And I'll close with the poem that I like to close readings with because it's sort of a form of blessing. It's called Sláinte, which is the Irish greeting for health. You might toast it in a bar. It's written for Seamus Heaney. And it came to me originally after Seamus had died, and they were still republishing poems of his in the New Yorker after his death, and always with his dates beneath them. Sláinte for Seamus Heaney. 3 months dead, and your poem appears in the glossy mag. Below the byline, your years pried apart with a paltry black hyphen. In your honor, I crack a cold one, ragged moonlit clouds frothing atop a pint of midnight, and toast to all our fermented spirits, lush on the summer tongue, our sullen eloquence, the cold glass weeping inside the palm, because, and you'd be the first to remind me, you can no longer see, sip, taste, savor, nor honor with song this starless June diminuendo. I can and do. Thank you.
That was a great reading, Steve. Thank you very much. In fact, it was so good, I think it deserves another round of applause.
Thank you, Harris. Thank you all.
So, and I, for one, will have a question for Steve when he gets to Q&A. Okay, next up is Elizabeth Sylvia. She was a poet and teacher from Massachusetts whose first book, Nothing But Witches, in 2022, won the 2021 Three Mile Harbor Press Book Award. She's been a semi-finalist in competitions sponsored by CNR Press, Diagram 30 West, and Wolfson Press. Elizabeth keeps bees and is a reader for SWWIM every day. So please, I give you Elizabeth Sylvia.
Thank you so much for having me, Harris, and Gloria, wherever you are. Thank you. Thank you for signing me up here. That was an amazing reading, Stephen, and I keep thinking about the idea of hunger as the opposite of grief. And then I felt like once you said that, it became kind of this thread, the eating of different things in the poems. So I might steal that. I'm going to read from None But Witches, which is a book that's all poems that I wrote after I decided, for my New Year's resolution in 2018, I decided to read all of Shakespeare's plays in a year. Which I didn't actually do. It actually took me 2 entire years to read them. But I was reading them and I started to have a lot of feelings about things I wanted to say to Shakespeare, especially about the experiences of a lot of his female characters. And I started just writing poems one at a time. And in the end, I had this huge collection and I'm so excited. I was so excited to have it published. So let me say, I don't think you need to know a lot about Shakespeare to read the poems in this book, but I will explain a little bit of the context for them. I'm going to start with a couple of poems tonight. You know, I started this book in 2018, and I'm thinking already like that there was a lot of contemporary things that influenced me as well. And I kind of wish that some of the things that I was writing about and thinking about then weren't no longer timely, but unfortunately they still are. And this week in particular, I've been thinking about the that boat that sank in the Mediterranean and all of the women and children who were. So I'm going to start with a couple of poems that reflected then and now on situations like that, though somewhat obliquely. The first one is called Unbind, and it was inspired by the scene in an early Shakespeare play called King John, where Constance, who had been a queen who was deposed, and her son has just been killed, and she comes on stage and she's absolutely just wild with grief, and King John is trying to talk to her, but all he wants to tell her is to put up her hair. If she could just put up her hair and calm down, everything would be different. I think like, you know, what an example of tone policing from 16th century at that point. So unbind. Run into the marketplace with me, mothers of this world, for I have seen you weeping at the dry-edged river and waiting from the boats, dead children in your arms. Run into the marketplace with me, mother, madre, mama, mater, mutter, mater, mama, mama, mama. And we will take the pins out from our scalps and shake our heads and fill our silenced mouths with hair. Run in your bared feet to the marketplace with me, where we can beat the drums of grief until we open fissures in the earth that swallow princes as they draw the lines our children cannot cross. Flood the marketplace with hair of snakes and words that cannot be choked back. Shatter and rage and stomp until the maps curl up in fists of ash, because our hair makes fire of the wind, and all around us knots are come undone, and birth instead of death comes thundering. And the next poem I'm going to read is also a little bit of an immigration poem, obliquely immigration poem, that was inspired by Pericles. In Pericles, oh my gosh, I should have, I'm blanking, totally blanking on the character I want to talk about. She's cast overboard. They think she's dead. She's cast overboard in a coffin, and she comes up on shore in a strange land. And I thought, you know, that's an immigration story. Oh, dear Diana, where am I? Which is a line from Shakespeare. And in the poem, she asks, oh, dear Diana, where am I? Where's my Lord? What world is this? And those lines are incorporated into the poem. Oh, dear Diana, where am I? You are at the opening of an eyelid where the faces of strangers swarm across your oculus, their stares headlights over a darkened field. Better to ask where you came from, cracked from your breathless box and into mourning, much like we all are, at least once in our lives. Where you are is no place to yourself, every threshold a covered mirror that does not return you. And even the language of welcome from this moment falls into your ears like a rain of stones. Where's my Lord? What you have loved or worshiped is gone from you. By waking, you have cast it off. A silent glass door closes behind. Put aside the box of sweet spices you have carried here and submit to stand clear of memory. What world is this? Neither of us can know if this world also is a casket and a raft laden with spice. If the goddesses and loves of the old world will find any of us again. Okay, so I will say about this book that one morning my friend Heidi came downstairs and her boyfriend was reading this book, and he said, wow, this is really good. And then he said, is Elizabeth okay? And I have always felt like you should ask Shakespeare if he's okay. You should ask Shakespeare, you know, what is happening to him in his life, because he did some terrible things to women in his plays. And I will say, you know, that I wrote this in 2018, 2019, when Trump was president, and the Me Too movement was happening. And there, you know, it felt like, to some extent, there was this kind of assault on women that may be continuing now. So this poem is called Morning After, and it's inspired by the character of Ariel in The Tempest, who, by the way, is a non-gendered spirit. So I will give it to Shakespeare for recognizing non-binary identities all the way back then. And in The Tempest, Ariel is a spirit who is basically enslaved to the wizard Prospero. And at the very end, Prospero leaves the island, which is Ariel's homeland, and Ariel says, "Merrily, merrily shall I live now that Prospero is gone." Morning After. Consider the morning Prospero and his men dispersed, and Ariel awakened from indenture, unbound from men's pressing. Freedom conferred only by Prospero's going away is not and never again-ness. Call Ariel's morning a day we didn't keep a knife by the door, didn't fret by the window when we let our children wander down the street. Call it a morning we could run in solitude and fear neither death nor an afterlife of shame or the chapels of our bodies by choosing to go alone. Call Miranda's morning by another name. I felt like one of the, well, you probably know if you've seen even only a few Shakespeare plays that one of the tropes in Shakespeare is the woman who fakes her own death. She gets accused of something that she's not responsible for, and there's no way out. And so she fakes her own death. And in the end, you know, she comes back and everything is forgiven. And I wrote a poem about that called Resurrections, which starts with a quote from All's Well That Ends Well. The poem has nothing to do with the play. The hind that would be mated to the lion must die for love. So I guess from Shakespeare's perspective, you knew what you were getting into. Resurrections. What all the women in Shakespeare want, much more than to live, is dying. They promise it at every turn. I understand. I too tire at the sound of my voice, begin to stomp and boo in the hope I will hasten off stage left and make more room for the whoring and fighting. And to reprieve the embarrassment of having misjudged, thought myself brazenly faithless. Would I want to go on looking at myself? No. It's the shame of being noticed that gets me. Though the promise to die goes always unremarked on, just like the love that inspires it burns in a little unnoticed closet where I could hang myself, but then somehow find myself again in the fifth act, all smiles and forgiveness. I'm going to read two more poems from None But Witches. And the next one actually is my favorite poem in the book. It's called Nell's Ode. Nell is a character. Well, I don't even know if you can call her a character from A Comedy of Errors. She's a kitchen maid and she never appears in the play, but there are two sets of twins in A Comedy of Errors who are separated at birth, and one twin lands where the other twin lives, and all of a sudden he's got this woman chasing him around saying that they're married because she's married to his twin, but he doesn't know his twin is there, right? That's how it goes in Shakespeare. So Nell never comes on stage. You only get to hear about her, but 2 entire pages of the play are dedicated to making fun of Nell. She's fat, she's smelly, she's greasy, she's ugly. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And the theme of the humor is the idea that Nell is like a globe and all the different parts of her body are different countries. And I think I would like to talk back and have Nell reclaim her power. So this is called Nell's Ode. And the epigraph from Comedy of Errors is, "She is spherical like a globe. I could find out countries in her. All that is great in me might be made little by a word, but I will spin you a tale that brings you in again. For every orb is an icon, and every kitchen an abattoir birthing appetite. You name, but in the kitchen, fire is the force worth knowing. I am swart as the earth's crust, soot as the banked embers, hot as a devil's dam inside, just like this mantled world. And I will swallow you in me so that the map lines of your life are lost. By me, you are a stranger made a woman's man, uncertain to himself, within the wheel until you turn, but just as I turn toward you and away, as if you ever could stop burying in me desires that I raise in you." And I thought I would sort of close this down. Well, I'm going to read one poem from some newer work, but I thought I would close down the section on None But Witches with a poem of longing. And the title of this is Hiraeth, which is a Welsh word of longing for a past that can't be retrieved. If you know the Portuguese word saudade, it's sort of analogous to that. And I named it that because in Henry IV, Part 1, the Welsh daughter of one of the characters marries an Englishman, and she doesn't speak any English. So in the play, whenever it's her turn to talk, it just says, "The lady speaks in Welsh." And that, I'm imagining in Shakespeare's time, the actor was just kind of like, sounded like the Swedish chef. And everybody laughed. But I'd like to imagine sort of what is inside what she is thinking of. Hiraeth. Sometimes I throw stones in the river that runs between our countries. Sometimes I am the stone who falls to the river bottom. My head is a stone that falls out of language, your English words passing over me as I sit here. I live beneath a diving bell, and time no longer makes himself known to me. You may be gone an hour or a day, my love. I do not know you. Whether your mouth is open or closed, your words cannot move me. Sometimes when I throw stones in the river, I imagine myself carried away from here. Imagine a love that carries me on its back, like the water carries a leaf that the wind has carried into the current of his hands. When this love holds me, I feel nothing but lightness, see nothing but sky. Okay, if it feels like I have time, I thought I would read one more poem from a collection that I I'm working on right now that thinks about, it's a lot of it is about climate change in my garden, but it's also about Marie Antoinette, because I think of Marie Antoinette as a character who kind of through her excesses brought the end of an era, and yet at the same time was kind of trapped by her own surroundings. Like, what else could she have done? And I sort of feel like for those of us who are living in the modern world, we're sort of in that experience too, where we're trapped in a system that we are also, by virtue of being in it, causing our own destruction. So this poem is called Sécheresse, which is the French for drought. 3,000 miles apart, Marie Antoinette's hamlet and mine raise the same dust ghosts beneath each human step. Grass so brittle it begs for fire from an errant spark. The fountains at Versailles run low, and Paris shimmers in the heat, a corset of days above 100 degrees. I'd like to walk in my bare feet on a carpet of deep jade, but I won't water my lawn, and the newspaper's map flames my whole state with the orange of drought. Still, I bring the hose to my bed of flowers, reluctant to forego their rainbow bursting, the promise in their soft, plump buds. Green is every living thing's color of refuge, sunshine and shadow, water and air. I breathe beneath the same lace-leafed oaks that shelter the catbird and the silent hare. But like at Versailles, the leaves already yellow here are dry enough to crackle underfoot. My daughters rush to stomp on them and crush their papery cups to rings of soot. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was lovely.
Thank you.
We're going to have a Q&A, and so we'll open up first to, does anybody have a question to ask either Elizabeth or Stephen? So you might speak out if you want to this time. Is there anybody? Okay, well, I'll start with Stephen. Oh, Lee, do you have a question?
Yeah, it was a beautiful reading from both poets. Steve, I had something, but I don't think I got the quote right, but you said something about using memories to reshape our lives. Is that what it was?
Something like that. Yes. Yeah. The past changes the future.
Yeah, it was. I loved hearing the poems about your family, and I wanted to know if you could say a little more about that idea of the past changing the future.
Well, when I talk to students about when we write memory poems, I ask them if they think memories are true. And they all say yes. We believe memories are factual experiences. And of course, that's not the case. Memories are, part interpretation, part imagination. But I've written poems about my father, for, 70 years almost now, or 60 some odd years. And they change. They change because I change. And what I realize is that every time that we take out a memory comes out in the writing, we're actually reshaping it, something about how we've grown since then too. So the idea of memory is not just about recording, it's about navigating. So the poem that was such a great wish fulfillment was imagining journeying towards my father in his deathbed. Whereas as an 8-year-old, I was there, but I wasn't really present the way a child isn't really present the way he would like to be now. So I think that I encourage students always when I'm working with them. I think it's true for us as adults too. We bring back our memories to possess them, but also to maybe find a way that they repossess something inside us and give us a new take on it. And for me, that gives me some freedom, some new freedom in how I'm going to, move on or how I'm going to feel about what happens next.
Yes, I I think it was Oscar Wilde who said relationships do not end with death. And I think the feeling like you're somebody can die, but we still go on in a relationship with them. And in your poetry, I felt that. And
Yeah, thank you. I agree wholeheartedly. Yes.
thank you.
Somebody else? Hello?
I had a question.
Go ahead. Who's that?
I had a question for Elizabeth. When you were reading the Shakespeare plays, did the poems come as you were reading them or after the 2 years or what?
So the first poem I wrote actually was about Titus Andronicus, and I had been reading I have an Oxford collected Shakespeare that my parents gave me when I was 16, and that's what I was reading. So I was reading the plays are in chronological order. So I was reading the plays in chronological order, which, by the way, if you're a mom, is not a great way to read Shakespeare, because Shakespeare is terrible to moms in the first 12 plays. Every mom who has a kid, that kid dies. Like that, it happens over and over and over again. And then when they're all upset about it, the men around them are just like, could you be quiet, please? So the first play that I wrote a poem about was Titus Andronicus. It was probably 6th or 7th play, and I was kind of just doing it intermittently for a while. And then when I had about 30 of them, I thought, well, I'm going to do them all then. And that's what I did. And a couple of the plays I ended up going back to rewrite. But it was it was kind of a great poets training for me. Because I spent so much time with Shakespeare's language, and no matter how mad I was at him for how he was treating his characters, I could never be mad about his words.
I just thought you did a brilliant job of weaving, the different people, and especially the ode to what was her name?
To Nell.
Yeah, that was funny. So I enjoyed both readings very much. Stephen, yours were very touching. I had not heard them, so thank you both of you.
Your poem about your father and the frozen, what did I write down? Oh, the words frozen over in his throat and the snow covering up the footsteps. I mean, that was just so beautifully done.
Thank you. It's also interesting because, for example, as we age, there's a whole host of medical experiences that we didn't understand when we were younger. Suddenly we're having to become scientists. So I think a poem is a way to digest some of these experiences and cast them in terms that make human sense, not just the medical sense.
Yeah.
So, Stephen, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about not so much your poetry, which was quite wonderful tonight, but your, I think it's called the Red Letter Poetry Project.
Sure.
Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm.
And right, a lot of people here might know about it, but there might be some who don't.
Sure. It's a project I began during my first year as Arlington's laureate. It was originally going to be hard copies mailed out to people spontaneously as surprise poems. It was just trying to think about ways of getting poetry into people's lives in unexpected manners, especially the people who might not normally browse the poetry book aisle. And then COVID hit and the lockdown, and we couldn't come together to address envelopes. But after a week of isolation, I realized we were all going a little stir crazy. And I thought poems were more necessary than ever. So I began doing this virtually. Originally, it was beginning with poets from Arlington, then poets from Massachusetts. And then as the situation in our country became more and more dire, poets from all across the country and the world. I love the fact that I've been able to publish Pulitzer Prize winners down to poets publishing their very first poems. And one poet who was here before, I hope he's still here, named Phil, who has published 3 poems in his life, 1 in college and 2 in the red letters at age 90 plus. I see you there, Phil. I love the fact that Phil waited a long time to have his literary debut. And I love that the red letters could do that. So if anybody wants to receive a poem a week in the mail with a little commentary, or since there's probably almost all of your poets out there have poems that you'd like to submit, just send it to me at stephen.arlingtonlaureate@gmail.com. And you'll get to see new poems and perhaps maybe even contribute poems too. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Could I ask a question since I was yakking? I have a question for Elizabeth. You mentioned obviously about Shakespeare and the language. I was wondering if the rhythm of Shakespeare began to change your own rhythmic sense in your poetry. So when I'm reading, for example, I teach Asian poetry, and I'm teaching Asian poetry, and all of a sudden I'm noticing the clipped rhythms of Japanese or Chinese poems start to sneak into my poetry. So I'm just curious if Shakespeare's rolling rhythms and rhyme scheme and sound play became something that changed the way you hear in your own language.
Yes, and at the same time, I've always been a poet who, if I am left alone to worry on my work, it will eventually turn into free verse iams, like it just will naturally go in that direction. But I was actually very sensitive while I was writing these poems to try to avoid being too metrical, because I felt that I didn't want it to be imitative. So while I really loved I almost felt like I was marinating in a language bath with Shakespeare, with the rhythm and the rhyme schemes and the punning and the language play and the polysemy of everything. But I also was like, but I'm not trying to sound like Shakespeare when I write these poems, because I know that I'm not as good as he is.
Well, I heard sound play that in my mind I associate with some of Shakespeare. So I wondered if that way he was insinuating himself into your own metrics.
I think, like you said, with the Asian poetry, it's like whenever you spend a long time with one writer's voice or with one particular style, it will rub off. Well, it'll rub off on me. You're a stronger writer than I am if you can avoid it. I give kudos to anybody who can maintain a truly individual voice when someone else's voice is constantly playing in their head.
Well, is there anybody else or no? Okay. If there's nobody else, we have a very short open mic. We have 3 people. We have Carla Schwartz, we have Crystal Carroll, and myself. Is there anybody else who would like to sign up for the open mic? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, so we are going to start with Carla Schwartz, and it's 1 poem per person. It's because we try to keep it. We're going to be over time anyway, but I want to keep it to 1 poem.
Okay.
Carla Schwartz.
Thank you so much. And this reading was so wonderful tonight. And I have to set my alarm here. And so I'm going to read you a poem called My Father's Impermanence. I live in this chair now, my home, my bed, my waking dreams. My daughter, she worries about everything, so I don't have to. The pressure on my bladder illustrates the Poincaré conjecture. I can't remember the details, just know there's a map and I have to pee. To stand up from my recliner reminds me of my last trip to China. A pain in the ass to get there, but oh, what a relief to arrive. Today, to walk to the bathroom is a hike up Bear Mountain, the flat part of the main trail, all my walker shuffle is good for. While I stand from my chair, dappled light shines in through the blinds and the trash collectors drive by. While in my chair, I face the television. I catch a word or two, then work the stories into my dreams. I don't face the windows, the world that passes me by. A small screen on the coffee table displays photos from my life, and here's where my other daughter appears live. She's not here, doesn't see what I don't know. I don't know what I don't know until someone asks. I had the eye surgery a few years back so I can see. My thoughts flow from me like whey through gauze. My brain feels like cheese. I like cream cheese on my bagel. I do know this is no life I lead. That's why I close my eyes. That's why I nod off to sleep. That is, until Poincaré creeps into my dreams. That's my one poem. And I'm here on the lake. You can kind of see it behind me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carla. Up next is Chris O'Carroll.
Thank you, Harris. After Elizabeth's reading, I have to confess that I have not read all of Shakespeare's plays. I have read quite a few of them, and I've acted professionally in a handful of them. So I felt I had to follow her with a Shakespeare adjacent poem. This is Romeo and Juliet. Although they had been, well, you've got to be, carefully taught to hate all of the people their relatives thought that they ought to, at first sight they fell hard. They played passionate, eloquent scenes. Then they died for their star-crossed love, silly, impetuous teens. Some scholars insist we can't rate them authentically tragic because they were done in by chance, not fate's classic bad magic. But still, they've acquired a mystique that few couples can equal. And how many love affairs since theirs have written their sequel? If you were born, say, white or black, Muslim, Christian, or Jew, such that someone's been brought up to hate you because you are you, and your heart strays to some place your tribe would prefer it not go, then you know what those kids from Verona paid dearly to know, that the yes of two souls tells more truth than the no of two factions, that hatred and love can be equally fatal attractions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And if there's nobody else who wants to read on the open mic, I'll close it out with one of my poems from my collection, No Time for Death. And the title of this poem is A Sneak Peek at a Poet's Will. Item: verses nurtured on marrow from singing bones under layers of dust. Item: stanzas dressed in flesh from the heart, draped in surplus brain pulsations, wrapped in packet with blood red ribbon. Item: excess grows roses that bite when one stops to inhale. Item: lines borrowed or stolen, nudge blank minds in bold directions, serve fresh on special occasions, bury stale thoughts separately. Item: crumpled bag home to a few nibbled on metaphors, most emotions spent, some wisely relish the remnants. Item: the desk that birthed overburdened pages can be left to no one. It labors without complaint when images gallop off the pages, become ingrained in splinters and stains. The legs wobble, speak with creaks, unwritten versions. Item, volumes of verses captured with accurate tone, napkins and other inspired fragments thrown in drawers for the moment. This is not the final statement, premature to lament unwritten passions. Volumes will increase, collections bound, the will be done. So that's from my collection, No Time for Death. That was kind of a plug. I'm shamelessly going to self-promote a little bit. This Sunday at 3:00, I am a co-recipient with Ruth Lepson of the Sam Cornish Prize, being given by the New England Poetry Club. I'll be reading at 3:00 at the Longfellow House. So that was almost as long as my poem. So anyway, I want to say many thanks for everybody who came tonight. Delighted to see all of you, even if it was briefly. Hope you'll join us again next month. I want to say thank you again to Steve Glines, my guest technical co-host. And I want to thank Gloria in absentia. You know, she's my longtime co-host. We've been doing First and Last Word Poetry Series since 2010 and counting, hopefully. So anyway, does anybody have any final announcements they'd like to make? Anybody coming out with a new book? Anybody hoping to read in our series?
How about
Okay.
Wilderness House should be out next weekend.
Okay, there's a plug.
There we go.
Okay. And if you're around on Saturday mornings from 9 to noon at Panera Bread in Porter Square, the bagel bars are always hold court. And it's a group of poets and other writers, published novelists, people who've written screenplays or regular stage plays, you know, all kind of creative nonfiction. I think we covered the whole 9 yards. And I'd like to think that the Bagel Bars are the lineal descendants of the Saturday Club, which met at the Parker House. So only because we meet on Saturdays. So anyway, thank you all for joining us tonight. And with that, I will bid you all a fond adieu until the next time.
Thank you,
Thank
Harry.
you. Thank you,
Thank you
Harris.
all.
It was a lovely evening.